It certainly will be a different style. Just going to start by setting the scene as to where I'm coming from with this, and after I finish the first slide I'm going to see if anyone's got any questions to clarify a bit about the context. So Tribal is a private provider of managed information systems, student record systems, various academic enterprise software. We do benchmarking in various ways, and since 2012 we've been developing some learning analytics, data software and professional services activities. Most of our customers are higher education, some in colleges, and what we're thinking about here really is, when we're talking about implementing learning analytics, it's doing a fairly conventional kind of thing about early detection of certain kind of outcomes. And I'll come into some of what those might be later on. In this particular talk, I'm talking about our work with, under the aegis of the JISC, Effective Learning Analytics project, where they're trying to get universities started, or colleges started on their first adoption of learning analytics. So the context now is going to be very much about these are first steps implementations. And one of the interesting things is that as part of that JISC process, they do have a readiness assessment, so that we have some assurance that these people that we're working with are kind of already on the cusp and haven't got a great deal of distance to catch up. Any questions on the context? Good. So just to broaden the idea about context, I think the idea about implementing learning analytics is a challenging one. I've got some epithets there which might come to mind. The essence really here is that we're dealing with a system which is complex, that any action you take, the system itself will react. And in particular with learning analytics, we need to accommodate the fact that people are learning what it is. Even those with expertise already are really also learning what it is. So there's no way of saying implementation is about deciding what we're going to do and then do it. And I've got on the right-hand side here a diagram which Rebecca has been working on with other colleagues I can see in the room, called the Rapid Outcome Mapping approach. And this really is a way of accommodating the kind of world that we live in. You can't just plan to act, you need to act in relation to your best assessment of the environment and then reflect on how things are going and work in a very strategic way. And the interesting thing about the Roma is it shares some of the features in terms of the iterative nature of it, the idea that you would keep going around with what I will talk about later, which is the CRISP process model. I think it's worth spending a little bit of time looking at what a process model is, or what I think it is at least. Process model really is a set of stereotyped tasks, stages that you might go through with associated tasks there. Intentionally, it's a model of something, so I've got this my favourite picture, the René Magritte. This is not a pipe, well, it's not a picture of a pipe, and this essentially is a process model, isn't a process as such, but it's some way representative of a process. You need to be thinking about what it means in your context, and we very much treat it as being a non-prescriptive tool, and indeed the CRISP-DM process model is intentionally non-prescriptive. I think key question is, and this almost goes to the conclusion of the whole talk, is why would we be interested in a process model for, as a technology provider, implementing learning analytics in these kind of contexts? And there's a whole variety of aspects here. I'll just pick a few. So shared vocabulary is one. So in having a conversation with my project managers, with project managers in the universities, it gives us a way of having a structured discussion there. We can start to share a vocabulary. We can use it to say, well, we haven't done this stage yet, to be rather clear about how we're doing things without going into too much detail. Internally, it helps us to be kind of organise ourselves, talking within my data science colleagues. We can organise our Jupyter notebooks for various tasks, organise our code, and we can have a kind of repeatable task because we're able to structure what we're doing. And down at the bottom there are two things which are particular to CRISP-DM, which I think are quite important to me, that, as I'll show in the next slide, the CRISP-DM really starts from thinking about what your business understanding is and what you're trying to do with these things. And I'm very keen that before we actually start to do anything practical with the data, we have a good foundation there. And the process model really helps us to say, this is a recognised process model that many people have looked at. That's the right way of doing things. Now, it might seem very obvious here, but still it's a good way of disciplining that. It's also an iterative model, and it legitimises this idea that we're going to have to take a number of steps through. So, I've mentioned several times, so here is the cross-industry standard process for data mining. It was developed about 10 years or so ago. It's cross-industry, it's industry neutral in a sense. It was very much a pragmatic kind of approach. So rather than being a theoretical academic exercise, it was based on what people were doing in practice. In some ways, I don't really like process models. They seem to be a little bit artificial, but actually this has turned out to be quite useful for the reasons I've just described. So, main body of this talk is going to be about the lessons we've learned applying it, and particularly how we've essentially tweaked the way we look at it compared to the standard approach. And I've used the word appropriation here. You know, we very much think about ourselves as taking this as an idea and we're making it our own. The way we're going to be using it is ours. Also remember this, the context is this is first stage pilots, and that will reflect some of what I say, or everything what I say. So, first starting on business understanding. So here are some examples of the kind of things that we might talk about with customers when we're talking about this phase of the process. It might be a variety of business objectives. These are often quite broad in a sense. So the top one here is about students making in good progress. It's not really framed in terms of attainment, but in terms of keeping up. We might have one lower down which is more about attainment, or we might have one which is focused on a particular subset of groups, the widening participation students. And then we'll talk about translating these into, okay, so these are your fairly broad sets of aims that you're trying to change the way things happen in your institution. How we're actually going to be concrete about these things. So we'll try and translate those to objectives that we can use statistically, but which also make sense in terms of internal process. I do always have a bit of an uneasiness using the word business because some people don't like the term. I don't particularly like the term. It's what appears in CRISP DM. It's very much about need to be flexible with it. So if your hackles are raised by the word business, please don't. So I'm going to use the term anyway. What we have found in these pilots is that on the whole, the sites we've talked to, they've come to learning analytics by already having an existing driver. They've had a problem with students not progressing cleanly between one year and the next year, and with trailing courses and having to repeat and those kind of things. Things like that. They've already got a reason for coming to learning analytics. They've not decided it's a technology panacea. There is a little bit of a shadow that people's minds are very much management reporting oriented. There is discomfort with the word predictive. That's often something where, particularly on the academic side, we've found that almost closes down conversation at times. We've almost always found that there are some aspects where not all stakeholders are really yet even listening, and generally not very clear ideas about what's this going to look like in terms of a process involving people and student support. Now, that's just the way it is. What I don't want to do is to anticipate some of these things and try to provide a solution when actually we're not ready for a solution yet. And we're going to go right around the circle on that one. So at this stage, we kind of slightly soften the business understanding. We really want to understand the drivers. Key thing is to get the local terminology right so that when we do present things there, we're using right words, like is it a school or a faculty or a department? Trivial things in a way, but they're the kind of thing where you can turn people off if you start to use the wrong terminology. So the kind of place we're going to end, this is premature because it's where we'll probably head to. This is the kind of dashboard that we're talking about. It's very much about individual student level estimation of risk. We have something we emphasise at this stage, I've shown here, it's called an influence chart. The idea is it allows you to see, in this case, 8% risk of withdrawal is across the whole faculty of business. And then you can do things, you can explore the various aspects. In this case, I'll open up accommodation, and you can find out that students living in private halls are significantly less at risk based upon historical data. So this is a way of getting into a discussion about the factors they have and what they know about or don't know about, where there might be surprises. And in a way, the predictive aspect of this stage, because of our experience of the pushback, is a little bit marginalised. Top right-hand corner here, it's there, and I'll come to that shortly. So, on to the next stage in CRISP DM process. Data understanding. One of the problems is often you have discussions with people and they'll come up with all these great ideas about the kind of data sources they've got available and might be able to use. Actually, we try and marginalise those and focus particularly on things like the core data. At this point, really, we want to make sure we've got the core entities there. In UK terminology, it's courses and modules. We want to make sure we've got the right organisational structure so that what we're presenting to people looks convincing. So that's very much that we'll try and marginalise some of the grand ideas about data there. Key thing at this point is to be working on data quality. We are working through the medium of a standard form, just is running a collaborative venture to get a standard way of representing this kind of data. It is a bit of a challenge working into that, but at least it means we have an opportunity to have a repeatable quality assurance process there because we've always mapped to it. At this stage, absolutely critical that we're able to bring our perspective on what quality is. Others might have ideas about what valid data is, and often it's the business process with which the data arose in will have its own criteria for what quality data is, and that's not necessarily the same as using it for learning analytics. So the kind of thing we'll have, this is very difficult, so I'm afraid the distortion of my beautiful 16:9 ratio slides has not made it look very good. But so this is a Jupyter notebook. It's a standard kind of analysis of quality. We have some ad hoc measures there. We have some basic counts for categories there. It's a very quick way of getting a feel for whether what someone else has mapped into the standard scheme actually is going to be usable in our processes. Data preparation. So at this stage, we're really trying to move from just having established that the data is in a roughly sane state to thinking about how we're going to be creating useful statistics, either for the predictive analytics or to provide as a part of the influence chart. Big challenge here is that very often student record systems, being a system of record, lose aspects of history there. They're shocking at things like assessment. Do they have the due date of the assessment? Do they heck? Do they have the order in which assessments were due? Do they heck? So it's virtually impossible to try and reconstruct a kind of a history which you can use for training predictive models there. So you need to be a little bit creative, and as I said here, you can engineer better features for a lifetime. You do need to draw a boundary at some point. To guide us, because of the possibility of, we could, as I say, create lots of possible statistics there. Very important sometimes just to ask what do they already think are the influential factors, so that we can make sure that we're building those into the data we're selecting and presenting back to them there. At this point, we're really actually getting just enough so that we can create that typical stage one here. And the important thing here is give them something they can get their heads around. Can you describe what the statistic means in a single sentence? If you can't, at this stage, it really shouldn't be shown. There's stage one again. Whistling through, I know Rebecca's a harsh taskmaster here. Looking at some of the modelling here. So at this stage, we try and, in a way, place less emphasis on the predictive models. As I said, there is some aspect of pushback here, but also we're simply wanting to focus on a core data set. There's a limit to what we can do if we're getting started with a core data set there. And we want to get the core data set there so we can get our first site there with their data in as the basis of discussion. That really is the essence of this, is to get just enough to start having a discussion about things. Did mention this interest in descriptive rather than predictive analytics, but by putting a little starter model up there, we can start to, and it was something simple like demographics and basic facts about the course or module, and then something like withdrawal in year one. What would a student's risk be when they start on day one there? Now it's clear to everybody that's a very limited set of data points, but we can look at that and say, well, we know it's limited. We know that we can only do something like estimate risk, and changing the vocabulary from prediction to estimating a level of risk is sometimes quite a useful way of breaking the ice on that resistance. And we can talk about the fact that because the data that we're putting in is so crude and unrepresentative, inevitably we're only making generally fairly wild statistical guesses about risk. And that's a useful kind of discussion to go along the lines of it's not magic, it's a kind of an estimation of risk. We do also, as part of this stage, start to do things which are helpful for us in terms of building models in the future, but also allow us to engage with some of the more statistically literate people. There typically will be someone in a planning department who will actually be happy to talk about some statistics. Typically we'll do a simple logistic regression. Here we've got a section from accommodation ethnicity, parents' education there. We can talk to them about whether there's small sample sizes here and what the odds ratios are, whether their hunches about what's significant is reflected by this. We can talk about the limitations of a linear model. Got also on down here just a simple decision tree based only on age. People will typically band age in 5-year boundaries or whatever it might be. We can talk about what the data's showing us. Typically, I found that it's the first few years, they're basically fairly low risk. Students who leave it a couple of years before joining, they're the higher risk ones. The older ones are less risky. Now, that doesn't usually align with how people draw their age boundaries. At this point also, we're trying to get into a dialogue about the kind of process we're doing. We don't want our data science to be kind of purely opaque. We want to kind of show something about the process we're going through. Moving on, this is a very quick one, because frankly, we haven't really got enough experience of this to have lessons learned. So just fess up, that's the way it goes. On to deployment. Now, in a way, we're not really doing deployment at this stage. You know, we are thinking about these. This is almost the preparation for a first pilot. You know, we've been trying to set up enough of a system there to have a dialogue. We've been trying to make sure that it contains appropriate vocabulary, it's representative and realistic. To emphasise the influence chart, for example. We've got to a point almost where we're actually now in a position to go back and revisit those business understanding questions, because people have a better idea about the kind of way they might use this system in their processes, the kind of limitations of the predictive approach, but also what it could potentially do for them. So I've described it as being, we're after creating a credible system for end user engagement to actually start to engage some people in the academic departments. I think I might have been a bit too quick. It's only 18 minutes in according to my clock. CRISP DM process. We've used it now for about, in the process of using it for about 6 different sites, universities and colleges in the UK. They're all at first pilot stage. I outlined in the beginning that it's been quite helpful for us in terms of structuring our conversations with customers and internally, so that we can explain things like that we're not ready to progress to the next stage because we haven't established a good business understanding there. It's helped us to legitimise the idea that we are engaging in an iterative process, and at this first stage that it's very much about capturing the minimum required to get into a meaningful dialogue on real data. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much, Alan. I've obviously been too scary about my time. Right, so we have lots of time for questions. Who has got questions for Alan?
At our institution, the biggest challenge has been getting full LMS adoption. And so as a first stage in our place, it's really about getting faculty to buy into using the grade books as a foundational piece. And the challenge has been leadership buy-in versus ground-up support.
Yep.
So I think in your model, it certainly fits within it. But until you've got the data, the raw data, I think a grade book, which is the foundation, the other system stuff doesn't get there. And that leadership versus ground-up is, in our case, where we think the nuances are in terms of the cell. So I'm wondering if that's making sense. Have you encountered that in some of the pilots?
So there are 2 aspects: the practical aspect of the gradebook and LMS integration. That's always a bit of a headache. Our experience is that the practice in using things like Blackboard for collecting submissions, recording grades, is usually highly disconnected with the student records, so it's difficult to make correlation between things that were actually submitted and things that went towards the final grades. So in a very practical sense, that is an absolute headache. We haven't got a satisfactory resolution yet. JISC are doing a little bit of work on trying to do some automated mapping between what might go on in Blackboard or Moodle and student records data, but we've yet to establish whether it's sufficiently reliable. I think it's absolutely right that this is something that where there needs to be change, and there's a combination of bottom up and top down. Many of the sites we've talked to have got already on their plans to improve the way assessments are handled. I think this largely comes down to concern about the way that teaching will be evaluated in the future, and it's known that assessment and feedback are key areas where students are not happy with what they get at present. I'm not sure I answered your question, but that's my kind of general experience. It's very very vexing, really, that we don't have good processes in such a core aspect of teaching, learning and assessment.
Actually, just one little quick thing. I'd say in our adoption, we worried less about the quality of that mapping and more that they're already recording grades in Excel. It's just basically moving it over to another system that's available. And then secondly, the points we try to sell up are usually automated tools within your LMS that actually support then if the grades are in there, you can do student tracking, assess quality, grading sort of like the curve of how well students did on certain assessments. And just so from a faculty sell, it's like if you put it there, you got tools. And the other sell on the student side is if you've got all the grades and students can check it themselves, they don't bother you. And so we try to do more pragmatic sells, and then from an institutional perspective, the data's there, you can begin building up the system. So I think so far we've found some success in more of selling really pragmatic faculty time-saving things as a way of getting people in there. Because once they're in there, your system can evolve, but if they're never in there,
Yeah.
you really don't have a system for
Sure.
what I think where the need is for learning analytics.
Absolutely.
Any more questions?
So one of the things that really resonated with me is when we were talking about the gap on acceptance with faculty or academics. So I was just wondering, would it be fair to say that, to characterize this, that the really hard part of that part of the conversation is less about, say, like the math and more about the cultural change?
Yes and no. So at the moment, it seems to be there are lots of people are trying to in the UK trying to develop their personal tutor support for students, and I think in a way having information to support that is a relatively easy sell, but there's definite discomfort with being told what to do about it, and that's where I think the predictive word just makes people shiver a little bit. So I didn't really emphasise here. One of the things we've done, our initial kind of pitch is, well, we do predictive analytics, that's our differentiator in a sense. And then there's kind of a little bit of pushback. So what we do now in the first stage, I didn't emphasise here, is we also have an indicator of, we call it participation rather than engagement. Engagement seems to be a little bit overstepping what we can actually talk about. But there's various statistics about levels of participation. And it's those kind of things people want to look at. They want to see some more descriptive things. They might be like to see the predictives, but having the descriptive there makes them feel comfortable that they know how to interpret it. So it might be something like the fraction of resources the student view, and a kind of intuitive kind of thing. So I'm going to say, okay, I can see they viewed 80% of the resources that blah, blah. And then they can get into it. So we try to find ways in like that help people to make a start. Are you selecting people, Rebecca, or am I selecting people? Oh, I'll go for Simon because he asked good questions.
All right, you didn't have an evaluation phase, and I appreciate that's because the system's not deployed yet. But if you're going to roll out a predictive model or whatever you're going to call this thing, what's the process for validating that before it goes live? What kind of conversation are you having with what kind of people?
Okay, so maybe my thing here was a bit throwaway. So there's not enough experience in trying to use the CRISP-DM process for evaluation in relation to what we've deployed. That's not to say that we don't actually do evaluation of predictive models, and we have a whole series of things that we'll look at. You know, the complexity of the model. We'll look at precision and recall. So far, it's been very difficult to have a conversation with clients about precision and recall. Sometimes it's obvious. They will say, have an aspiration to say, we want to be able to say we've spoken to 90% of students who go on to drop out. And in that case, we can tune the thing so that we can say, you know, we are meeting your intention to talk to 90% of the students who go to drop out, at least based upon historical data. So we have all that there. The first time round, evidence has shown it's a bit premature to actually go into that with people. Have I answered your question?
Kind of, but I'll let other people ask questions.
Okay.
How did I understand you correctly? That when you said that it's business understanding, maybe we can say it's a needs analysis or something like that at the beginning. And if not, probably it's not the same, but it can be a little bit explained. Could you explain a little bit how you actually perform the needs analysis?
Okay, so
Have stakeholders, and usually in any of these processes we start with this.
Okay, so most of the people we've dealt with so far, in fact all of them, have had an existing somewhere in the strategic plan, something which they had identified as being a need. So from a kind of a strategy level, they had existing need there. In a various set of ways, there are different ways they deal with that. In some cases, there was a core team, which is, in smaller institutions tend to have a core team which might be looking at something and taking direct action within that team. So in those situations, it's easier to say, okay, what's your current model for taking action? How are you using information? What are you doing about it? What's your capacity for scale? All those kind of things. In others, there will be a developing view about having a wider group of people involved in student support. In those, my experience is there's not quite enough maturity yet for them to say how it's going to work in practice, and therefore how we would analyse what they really need is a bit difficult. So we make a best guess upon, trying to understand what their strategy is, what their drivers are, what their emerging expectations of a student support process might be, and how that's changing. And on the whole, people working with, they're coming to learning analytics as a way of trying to change their student support process. Is that satisfactory?
Oh, thank you.
So who would we talk to? Usually it'll be people who are leading student support. So one institution, it might be someone who was appointed to improve retention and progression.
So actually you didn't ask students or teachers what they're needing?
In the first place, no. So what we try and do in initial phase is to say we're going to establish what the strategic drivers are and who the key actors are, create something which is demonstrable, which is from their institution, with data from their institution, and that's the basis then for engaging with, it's up to the customer, of course, who they want to engage with, but academic staff there, so that we've already established an alignment with what they're trying to do strategically. So that's why I said at the end, we're now at the point to kind of start, really. So we come to the point where we've got something, we then want to go around the cycle again. Now, where we are with these GIST pilots is we're not yet there on that second cycle round. We are at the point where we're creating things for these internal groups of academics to look at and say, how will this affect my practice? And then we can start to reflect upon what we might do to make it fit for use in practice. None of these systems in the first iteration round are actually being used for live student consultations.
I think one last question from Young Sang, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. And I appreciate it for the readiness checklist or reference model to adapt the learning analytics service. My question is related to the evaluation process. Don't you think about related to tools for the evaluation, such as a reference workflows or system requirement checklist prior to adoption, the deployment of the learning analytics platform or service? In terms of the standardization community have been developing or almost done for learning analytics reference model or system requirement to have consider whether they have to proceed the learning analytics service or not.
Okay.
So
in this is kind of back to my context. In my context here, which was the first pilots within the GIST Learning Analytics project, they have this readiness assessment there. In fact, there's two people who will conduct readiness assessments, and they go into institutions. Absolutely right that that's a critical part of making sure that people are at the right stage. And if we were to do a similar thing ourselves for a commercial pilot, then we would use the same kind of a readiness assessment. So it is things like there's a technology aspect. There are a consideration of whether there is enough leadership at the right level in the organisation to be able to affect something there. There's things like data quality aspects, etc.
Right, so